okay, so we've known each other for 2 years. We started
Mhm.
talking when you were on your way out of the Neo-Advaita rabbit.
Yeah.
I know we talked about it, but one of the things that I feel like is important about your story, besides the fact that it's your story and it's unique to you, is that it seems like the two main reasons why people get drawn to Neo-Advaita and radical non-duality and self-negating Eastern paradigms is either they're looking to discover the truth or they're looking to end their suffering. And when I connect with people, and obviously when you connect with people too that have been damaged by these teachings, those tend to be the two main things that drew them to it or what they were seeking. But then this other category of people that you seem to fall into, which is where you weren't really seeking either of those two things, but you had a powerful experience on your own, independent of any teachings, that you didn't really know how to interpret. And then they look to understand it. People can end up having these powerful experiences, whether it's a feeling of oneness or all embracing love or whatever. And it feels like this massive, like mystical experience. And then you're like, what the heck was that? And what does it mean? And maybe even like, how do I have that more? And so then you start looking maybe things like spiritual awakening or oneness or whatever. And then people end up going down this rabbit hole of what this really means is that you don't exist, and this is the one way to awaken is to dissolve the ego or whatever it is, but so that you end up getting sucked into Neo-Advaita just from a place of trying to understand something that you went through. So if that's a good place to start, would love if you could share what was that initial experience that you had when you were younger.
Yeah. So I think I was about, yeah, this was, I think 15 or 16 years ago. I don't know if I was 2021, something like that. I was living in Chile at the time and I was walking down a beautiful wild beach on my own. And I had not, and I didn't have any like background in spirituality, as in it wasn't something I was in like at the time interested in or had been reading about it or anything like that, as far as I can remember. And I was just walking down this beach thinking things, nothing particularly. I think I had negative things on my mind, but nothing horrendous. It was just to get a little bit of a backdrop to how have a anyway. And yeah, and I was just walking on to beautiful wild beach, and then suddenly, oh, it's funny. I haven't talked about it in a while, but yeah, suddenly I must have looked up or whatever. I don't know what happened, but I suddenly went from being just in my head thinking about things, and I looked up, and then I suddenly just realized, oh my fucking god, what is this? And it was just this feeling of, oh my god, I don't know what any of this is. This myself, like nothing. This is all a mystery. This is a miracle. And I have no idea. I've never known what this is. I don't know what it is. And somehow I go through life thinking that I know what this is, but all the time it's just this just this weird miracle and mystery. And then I looked at my hand, I looked at clouds and the sand dunes or the sand, the sea, yeah, just everything. And just sensed that it was all, it's hard to put it into words again because it's all tainted by the non-dual speak, but like all one thing, all just this energy or molecules or whatever. And yeah, I definitely, there was a sense of it all just being this one energy or something. I can't even remember what words I would have used at the time because I suspect I read things in the meantime, all those years ago. Yeah, in the meantime, that I don't know what exactly I thought at the time, what words I could have used. I don't know, even the words. I don't know. There are so many words that are tied to the non-dual language that I feel a little bit icky about using them, but maybe I shouldn't because actually I should be claiming them. Yeah. And then I just felt, I remember thinking, I don't know, moments later, whatever, that even if I was in it, that basically it felt like freedom, like a non-circumstantial freedom, real boundless love and love for everything and just love overflowing and joy. And I just felt like they all meant the same thing. I remember thinking, even if I was in a prison, this freedom wasn't to do with circumstantial freedom. It was like a non-circumstantial freedom. So it's really
Yeah.
terrible. But it was incredible. Basically, that this was incredible. Oh my goodness, sorry, the sun's coming. The sun's chasing me around. I don't know what to venture moving away from the sun. But it felt, oh my God, how have I never seen this before?
Yeah.
And I felt like this is enough. This is the most incredible thing ever. And I could die happy now, but isn't it not, isn't it weird and incredible that if I'm lucky, obviously, you never know what will happen, but that we are given so many years to appreciate and be in something that doesn't even require time to be enough. And I think I had some maybe little insights or feelings about time and space or whatever, but I don't know exactly what I would say to that anymore, because I also realize again, I wonder how much I've read in the meantime and how
Yeah,
those,
I know what you
things
mean.
have shaped me. It's so hard. I wish I could go back and never have read anything and just like, experience that without all the other words and dogma or whatever, but or frameworks even. But what else? Yeah, it was just an incredible, incredible experience. It wasn't a thought. It was just this absolute feeling of wow. Yeah. So it was really beautiful. And over time, I've always, apart from now in the last few years since going down my rabbit hole, prior to that, it had always been like this incredible memory and with significant thing that had ever happened to me and the kind of thing that I could think back to and it could make me feel better if I was in a down place or something like that. So it was a little bit like PTSD's opposite because it was like, it would have caused a feeling of joy. And I could never, it was always a memory. I could never like get back to that place. Yeah, and that obviously in the end I
Yeah.
did try to. Yeah.
So what's always stood out to me about that, in contrast to what comes later, is just like really extreme sense of awe and wonder and like poignance and kind of significance. There's a preciousness and yeah, the love. But what I want to ask before we go further is, was there any, before you start getting into what comes next, did you have any big revelations about the nature of self and non existence or things like that? Or did that only come later?
It's such a good question, and I wish I could properly remember because I know that when I've talked to people in the prior to my rabbit hole, when I've maybe talked to close friends and maybe tried to talk to them about it, the way I know that I have said in the past something like that thing. I can't remember how I put it, but it was along the lines of I was walking along the beach and then suddenly there was no I and there was just the mystery, blah, blah, blah. And then, but I don't know if I actually felt that at the time. I'm wondering whether I recounted that story in that way because that is what I believed it was after reading all these frameworks. I don't think I did. I definitely, certainly not enough. To be honest, I'm sure that if I had felt that, like really significantly felt that there was no me, that would have really stuck in my memory as a memory. But I know that I did feel like I wasn't like, there wasn't this experience of, oh my God, I'm not here or
Yeah.
I've always been illusion. There was nothing like that actually. So it's really actually good that you asked that, even though in a way, I've asked myself that already a few times. And I know we've talked about it before. Only now do I think that surely if that had happened, if that really happened, it would be a very significant memory of my own. Whereas
Right.
actually all I remember was something just like this, yeah, just what I described of just that awe and wonder,
Right.
miraculousness and like that feeling of definitely the kind of, I do think that the oneness or the like interconnection or whatever we call it was one energy, but not that I wasn't there. And it's really hard to say, but just not in such a significant way that I can definitely
Yeah.
say that Maia disappeared. It's
Yeah. That wasn't the heart of the experience. Okay, so what happens? So after that, what comes next in this whole trajectory and what leads you to Neo-Advaita and Tony Parsons and all of that?
yeah. So one interesting thing that I can't figure out the chronology is I had a friend in Chile who was on a bit of a spiritual path in a way. And I remember she recommended The Power of Now. And when I read The Power of Now, I felt, oh my God, I feel like he's talking about this thing that I experienced because it was the very first time I'd ever heard anyone talking about some kind of like spiritual experience, basically. And maybe
Yeah.
this is kind of like pointing towards what happened with me. So that was really interesting for me because it was like, I'd never really heard anything like that before. And like I said, I wasn't on some kind of like spiritual trajectory before this happened. So it was really very validating, exciting for me to read someone else talk about some kind of experience like that.
Do you think that, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just wondering because I know that the Eckhart Tolle book is like such a starting point for so many people that end up in a rabbit hole, that it's a real mix of let's say, kind of presence pointers and experiencing being here in the now and all of those wonderful things, mixed with a lot of real, like, contempt and disdain for the ego and the separate self and needing to destroy that. So I'm just thinking back to the way you described your experience in terms of, I wonder if something that really resonated with you in the book was a lot of that whole kind of it's always now, these experiences of timelessness and just like being immersed in the now. And
Yeah,
imagine that
totally.
that would have really captured some of your experience.
Definitely. And it's interesting because I don't even really remember at all him talking about ego or the self
Interesting.
in any bad way, because all I latched onto was like some kind of spiritual
Yeah.
experience. He had a great time. It feels lovely. I guess maybe for me, because it was so fresh for me and so new to me, that whole spiritual world. Oh, such a funny phrase, spiritual world. What the hell am I? But spiritual, an interest in spirituality. That was also new to me. And that was the first, I think probably the first book that I read about it. So I was just being, every time I maybe read something, yeah, like the wonder of like life or now or whatever, I was like, oh my gosh, I just didn't even notice it. It's so funny. It gives you an idea of like
Great. I
how,
wish that had been my experience.
oh, that it got worse, didn't it? Because I
True.
it's very quickly after that, didn't I? But yeah, so as far as I remember, that was it. And it just, yeah, I remember sharing the book with my parents and my sister, wanting everyone to
Oh,
read it.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. This is the thing. But yeah, but then I went to start in my last year of university. I went to visit my friend Gloria in Australia. And when I was in Australia with her, I went into this bookshop and can't remember what kind of bookshop it was. I don't think it was like an esoteric spiritual bookshop, but maybe it had a section of books like that. And I picked up a book and it was called something like, oh my gosh, something about oneness and the nature. Oh, this is it. Essays or interviews on the nature of oneness or something like that. So it had interviews with people like Douglas Harding, Krishnamurti, Tony Parsons, Eckhart Tolle. Oh yeah, Eckhart Tolle. And the reason I picked it up and thought, oh, this could be interesting is because Eckhart Tolle was there and that was like, I'd read a book by Eckhart Tolle. So I was like, oh, it could be further studying of or finding out more about this thing that like happened to me. A little did I know that it had a forward by Tony Parsons and it had an interview with Tony Parsons. And when I read the interview with Tony Parsons, it really resonated with me as much as I hate it. And now I know that the reason it resonated with me is because he wasn't using spiritual language. He wasn't using esoteric language. He made it sound like something really normal. And yeah, it's something really normal and natural and just there's nothing spiritual almost about it or nothing esoteric about it. And I really like that because I did have a background in an interest in spiritual texts or spiritual language or, yeah. So it felt like it talked to me. He was just this bloke talking about this thing or not. It's not a, so it really resonated with me. And that made me get into him.
Okay, so you read it, it resonated with you, but do you remember like what that simple thing he was talking, was it
No.
is what it is or everything as it is or there's just this. Do you remember at all what his
Yeah. I think it was probably, I think he used words like, I'm sure he used words like wonder and like mystery. And yeah, so that probably resonated with me.
Yeah.
And just that he was talking about it in such a normal way. I can't really remember, but yeah, it probably was like, this is it. And it must have been like, there is, I'm not sure really.
But nothing like too hardcore yet. Just dipping
Yeah.
into the mystery of what is kind of thing.
But even if he had been saying something hardcore, it probably just didn't bother me at that point because I thought it was, and I thought it was connected to a really positive experience.
Yeah.
And I hadn't had, like at this point, I hadn't had any negative experience from any of this.
Oh,
But,
yes.
I found out that it was great for me because I was living otherwise in London and he did monthly meetups and chats in London. And I thought, oh, this is great because I can just go and actually go to one of his things. And it was only like £10 a session and like tea and biscuits included. And I thought,
You went for the tea and biscuit.
I went for the tea and biscuit. I was also lured in by this whole thing of these gurus and spiritual teachers. They charge so much for their things and So felt like that's all the scam. And this guy, look, he's just so normal and he's not blah, blah, blah. And he's clearly only charging £10 just to cover the rent of the room. He's an honest, good
Yes.
guy. Really had that vibe in it. I really liked that. And I just thought, oh, this is safe.
Right.
Oh,
Yes.
God. Any, yeah. But basically, I went to a few of his talks and I can't remember how many, and bought like one or two of his books. And I then remember feeling the message of, I can't remember what the message was actually, but I would just remember feeling really frustrated that I couldn't get it. And all I wanted was to get back to what I had experienced on the beach. And he was saying that by chasing something or having a goal, you're basically making it go, it's further away. But I can't remember how he put it, but it was just like, you're not going to get it, basically wanting to get there. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember feeling really frustrated and thinking, this is like, there's no way to get this. And that was, I guess, his message, that there is no way to get this. And it always
It's
has.
already your
Totally. Exactly.
thing
Yeah,
to do.
exactly. So that's when I felt really frustrated. I remember even like, I think I do feel like I had a little down moment of feeling really down about all of this and just feeling really frustrated by it. But it didn't last long, I don't think. And basically, life got in the way. I gave up on looking at that. I was pretty young. I was just about to finishing university and just looking for a job. And yeah, and just normal life got in the way, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Spared me getting into a horrible rabbit hole when I was younger. But also I also wondered to what extent I would have really been able to go down a rabbit hole because the internet was as big a thing. And actually, it's thanks to the internet, we get
Fair.
lives got in the way, luckily for me. And I kind of dropped all of that. Like for the next like 12 or so years, I dropped it. I was still like really interested and like it was always in the back of my head. It's the most significant thing that ever happened to me, like this incredible thing.
Yeah.
But it was almost like I don't know whether I thought, oh, that's something I'll address at one point in my life, or maybe didn't even think like that, But in the meantime, maybe I would like maybe read the book by Alan Watts, because
Yeah.
he just had to seem like quite accessible and blah blah. And, because I was just definitely dipping my toe in and just always being slightly interested in it, and even like my artwork was like in a way inspired by that experience, and like so he was always in my life, but not in a I need to know and I need to get back to that, right? Like this is my mission in life kind of way. It was just this beautiful thing that had happened and was very inspiring and just like
Sure.
made me feel every now and then when I thought about it, it made me realize like, so it just felt really good to remember it. So basically it wasn't really a part of my life in the sense I needed to pursue it full on until probably like, it would have been almost 3 years ago, I decided to address it full on, like head on, whatever. I was reading a book at the time that was not spiritual in any way. It was really work, but it made me feel like actually I really want to focus. Like it was kind of like pushing you to kind of like focus on the things that are like, what is it that is your truth, and what do you really want to like, know in this world or like pursue in this life? And it was not only like it wasn't to do with spirituality. And it made me kind of think like, well, it remains the most significant thing that ever happened to me. Why am I not addressing it? So it kind of made me feel like keen to like take it more seriously, like my life. And like at that point, it didn't feel, it just felt like addressing something that happened in my life rather than realizing that I was going to have like, I didn't realize I was going to go down this rabbit hole. But also like around that same time, a friend of mine, I don't know what happened first, whether I read the book I was reading first or that came after around the same time. A friend of mine recommended a meditation app, and it was waking up at by
Sam Harris.
no, exactly. Um, and I listened to an interview. I can't remember. I think I did download a free version of the app, like a trial version. And there were some interviews. There was an interview with Locke Kelly, and when I listened to that interview, it was the first time I had heard someone in absolutely years talking about a spiritual experience. And for him, it was a spontaneous thing as well. Um, so and he seemed quite happy and jolly and normal. He was a neuroscientist and it's like psychotherapist or something. Or like, yeah. So it kind of felt quite safe. Again, it didn't feel too like spiritual and esoteric and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So I like that. Um, and yeah, the way he described it was very beautiful. It really resonated with me because, yeah, again, it was like this spontaneous experience. And like, I think he was looking up at the stars at the time. And so there was probably some kind of like wonder, nature, that kind of vibe that really resonated with me because it was quite similar to my experience. So anyway, those two things combined, I was reading a not spiritual book plus listening to this interview, I think maybe just suddenly switched in my head. And I was like, do you know what? I really need to know what this was. And I really need to like dedicate myself to this. I know this is a thing that I need to find out in life. Like, yeah. So, and then, yeah, and then I went into the rabbit hole and I went from, yeah. And at this point, the internet, there's just so much of the internet was still around, like was around. I was young. So, like, it was just, I think we
Not
didn't wear so many features. There
Yeah,
weren't so
there
many,
weren't hundreds and hundreds of individual
absolutely,
teachers everywhere.
totally. I think back then, the only people I remember from back then, from like, when I was researching it back then, um, or that I looked at the time, actually, it probably, of course, there were way more people, but I remember it was Tony Parsons, Richard Sylvester, Lisa Kerr, Jeff Bostel, like maybe more people. But anyway, so then yeah, just, um, yeah, and just I just remember, by the way, with all those years ago, remember thinking, oh my God, Tony Parsons, he's like really got it. Like the way he talks about it, that's really it. Like, and I remember even thinking, like, this is embarrassing to admit. So I'm kind of out here. Oh, leave it, leave it. I mean, I'm going to be self-conscious, but just kind of like feeling like, remember, I can't remember who I was talking to, but just kind of like thinking, yeah, but because like he kind of, what's the word? Not criticizing, is like he's quite derogatory and about like other teachers. And like I remember he said something about Eckhart Tolle. And I remember thinking, yeah, that's so true. Eckhart Tolle is so much about the path and blah blah blah. It's just so funny how your brain could be molded. And obviously, I was way younger then, but like still, like it's quite scary to realize that how your own brain can like be like essentially just not question, like, like, because I guess you feel validated by the fact that someone is talking about this experience that you think no one else has had. And
Yeah.
you just think you feel like there's the people who have had these experiences are few and far between because you don't know anyone else like that in your actual life. So you really hold on to like the words of like the people that you think have had this experience because you think they have an authority. Because it's not everyone's had this experience it's from what you know, or you don't like people in your real life who you can talk to about it. You really fucking trust the people you hear talking about it. And that's so fucking dangerous. And that's such a big part of like the danger of all of this is like, because it's kind of maybe not as common to have these experiences, although it probably is getting more and more common.
Yeah.
Like really hold on to like the access that you do have to people talking about it. But
Yeah.
yeah, so, yeah. And then what was I saying? Rabbit hole, lots of different teachers, the internet, and I basically just flitted from different teachers and listening to all sorts of teachers and talk about their or all sorts of speakers or whatever.
When you say talk about what? What were the main messages? Like there's no doer and there's no self or the world is a
Yeah.
dream. And I know like they all probably had their own different variations on what the message was. But this
Mm,
is a time where you were kind of getting the indoctrination of all of these
totally.
ideologies kind of mashed together on like, so what,
Yeah.
like, what were you starting to like take on as a set of beliefs and truths about the self and the world?
Yeah. Like that is such a good and obvious question. The main thing was like that I don't actually exist as a person and you, there is no you basically.
Is it like also mixed with like Maya's just a story?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. The need of being a story. Yeah. The me is just a story, that there is no such thing as you actually existing. And yeah, just definitely that was like the thing that probably caused the weirdest experience, just kind of existential and
Yeah,
I felt
right.
it was even crisis because I felt like I didn't even deserve to have an existential crisis because there was no need to have an existential crisis. There was this fucked up thing of like, I'm not even having an existential crisis because apparently I don't
I'm
fucking
not feeling.
exist. Yeah. But, but it's like all this pain isn't even being felt by anyone. Yeah. So it's exactly. Yeah, this is now kind of, I guess, talking about that whole rabbit hole, really
Yeah,
about
so,
like,
like so
I don't
you were
know.
hearing these radical new beliefs about the nature of self and reality that are totally derealizing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, totally.
you don't
Oh,
exist, nobody exists, you know?
exactly. And I thought or felt, so I was addicted to watching these videos, to listening to everything, to like reading books. It was an addiction. Like I also, and I've heard other people say it before that like, I would be listening to a video and if I missed something, I would feel like, oh, I need to go back a bit just in case I missed something the thing that's going to like get me to like blah, 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 to wake up or the thing that I was, I was literally, I guess it was something close to an addiction. Like, um, because I essentially felt, these speakers were telling me that, I mean, not everyone, but like, I remember someone once, saying that like, it's a waste of a life to not realize the truth or, to not awaken. And I was like thinking, I am indoors, like with my laptop, watching these videos. It's a fucking beautiful day outside. There's so many things I could be doing today. And I am stuck here, glued to my laptop, watching these videos. I feel like I'm wasting my life for the first time. Like, I feel like this is a waste of life. But then there was the voice of, yeah, but the tyranny of the ego that would tell you something like that there is a life to waste. There, basically this whole kind of like, the messaging was like that whole voice, isn't that what we need to free ourselves of? That there is something that we need to like, that there is a life, that there is even a life not to waste. Like there is no such thing as a life to waste or not to waste. So free yourself of that. So I kind of felt like, then I kind of felt like, no, I have to be here because I need to like, almost interrogate this voice in my head that there's telling me that there's a life to enjoy and like make the most of, because that bullshit, like there's no such thing as a life to waste or to enjoy. Free yourself from that thought. So it was this horrible feeling of like, actually, intuitively, I felt like, what the fuck am I doing? This is such a waste of time, waste of my life, my beautiful, precious life, all my life energy, all the things I could be doing. And I am just depressing myself watching these videos. But, me then fighting that and being like, no, this is exactly the thing I need to be doing because the whole thought is the prison. The whole thought that there's something to enjoy in life, that there's something to make with your life, that is the prison of, thought, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really fucked up in that way. Also, I remember so I kind of felt like I was, I guess, even I wonder if you can relate to this, like even with like depression, it's a tricky one to use because it just feels like something, it doesn't feel like depression because I guess you kind of feel like there's not even anyone, you don't even believe there's anyone to claim that depression. So it's like next level weird, fucked up shit of like, but if I was to say it in simple terms, it felt like I was depressed and then, but waking up with anxiety, waking up really anxious and like feeling this anxiety. And then like throughout the rest of the day, maybe that turned into like more depression. Um, and I just remember one morning waking up. I don't know if it was actually not something, but I just remember being in bed and thinking back and kind of feeling like, I know that another time in my life, I would have been enough of like, I don't know, into myself or had enough like self-compassion or something like that to kind of like treat this situation or like a little bit at least, like, one of my tools in my toolbox would have been to like love myself. And so some kind of self-love or self-compassion, because I knew, obviously I knew that I was feeling shit. And so I remember thinking this and thinking like, about self-love or self-compassion. And then this other voice coming in and telling me like, yeah, but the whole thing is there is no self to love. There is no self. And it just felt like this slam down to like, just like, I just felt like, fuck me, there's no way out. There's
Yeah.
no way out. Like, I feel shit and I don't deserve to feel better because there is no me to heal. There is no me to like feel better. Like this, it was essentially, it felt like being abused, like psychologically by my own brain, which, but then, and it did feel like such kind of psychological abuse
You'd
with
like
internalized.
internalize the voice
Absolutely.
of
Exactly that. Like, I remember first thinking it was my own brain, but actually, no, it was the internalized message and the voices of these teachers and their messaging. So I literally felt like I was recovering from abuse. Like, and when I read, like, I'd listened to account, like, there's been, over the last couple of years, kind of, uh, through for random reasons, like listen to like a podcast about cult recovery or recovery from like narcissistic abuse. And then I remember listening to one story once and of someone who was recovering. And I just like, it literally made me cry because in a way, she was describing such a similar feeling.
yeah.
So like that kind of feeling of being trapped, of like, yeah, just kind of like beating yourself down. It was really, it was, and all these little things over time have made me realize like, how really fucked up that was. And like how it's no light thing. And it's like, it's hard for us people who are recovering from this whole thing because
Yeah.
we can't say, oh, this was a narcissistic abuser. He was the one, I was the victim. It's a bit, or this is a person who was a sociopath who abused me. It's a little bit more like, yeah, it's not as clear cut as that, or it doesn't seem like it is yet. Like, so I
Right.
feel like there's shame around it almost, or like it's harder to like be like blunt about who you're calling the abuser. It's a bit
Right. Yeah.
more complex almost, but
And
um,
something that like stands out to me is, and we can talk about this maybe more next time, is that the whole sort of message is that you're trapped in the prison of me or you or Maya, and that in order to awaken and be free from suffering and know the truth and just, in order to be spiritually awakened, you have to break out of that prison. But
yeah,
what strikes me about you and other people that I've talked to is that you weren't experiencing yourself as imprisoned. You were then told that you were imprisoned and that you needed to get out of that prison. But like for someone like me, I felt like I was imprisoned in my ruminating neurotic mind and I wanted to get out of it. And so many people want that. So they're like, yeah, I'm in a prison and I've been feeling this way for years. Give me a key out of this prison.
yeah,
And you were not just given a way out of prison, you were first led to believe that you were in prison even when your life was, you know, pretty good or okay. And
yeah.
so that's what I see as like pretty unique too, is that that can happen sometimes, is that people who don't feel imprisoned are then told that, yes, you are in prison.
So fucking true. And I think that's a really important point, and we should definitely like delve into that more next time.
This is going to be part two. Probably people will notice a slight difference in the lighting. You were talking about how you were spending all this time like poring over these books and listening to the non-dual videos. And you were talking about that sort of like addiction phase that pretty much everyone who goes down this rabbit hole talks about, that phase where they're addicted to listening to the videos and reading the books. And it's actually interesting because in the recent debate between Richard Sylvester, the radical non-dual author who wrote I Hope You Die Soon, and Tim Freak, he actually described his own addiction. He was saying, I was addicted to these teachings and I was going to Tony Parsons and nothing was really happening, but he used the word addicted. And so I think it's just a given in these circles that you get hooked on, like you were saying, listening to someone who tells you that there's no problems because you don't exist, that
Right.
sense of like relief that it can bring, but also like you were saying, this feeling that like you're trying to get something or that you're gonna be awakened and you're gonna have the realizations that they're saying are the realizations of the truth and non-existence of the self. It's gonna set you free and blah blah blah.
I think that my addiction to it was basically to do with the fact that I believed that what these people had was the truth of life. And I had to get it because I had already started. I had opened this door and there was no way of closing it, because once you have opened that door, essentially, if you're going to try and close it, you're going back to what you think is a lie or the matrix or an illusion. And how could you possibly live in the world again when you now see it as something that's fucked up, really? Something that's not something that you've been told is people living in a dream or whatever. I guess my addiction was like knowing that there's no way of going back now. That's what it felt like. And I so regretted ever opening up that can of worms. I really regretted looking into any of this, because I really thought I have fucking ruined my life forever, because just, I used to have a pretty decent life. I think I felt like I was quite a vibrant, joyful person. And I really felt, I can't believe how much I fucked my life up now. And it really felt like forever, because it felt like there's no way of going. I I've seen the truth now. There's no way I could possibly, because if I was to, so I just thought like the only way is keep going forward. I really didn't want to keep going forward. And that also reminds me, there were a couple of reasons I didn't go forward with it. One was because I felt probably like the kind of fear that a lot of people talk about, that they go through, of like the idea of like losing your ego, whatever, or the ego falling away, whatever, the kind of existential fears and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But also, maybe there's a few reasons, but the next one is there's two that are linked. When I looked at these speakers, particularly certain ones, but actually quite a lot of them, I really felt like I didn't want to be like that. Like when I heard I don't even want to say, especially some of the radical, I have a few names in my head, but I just felt I just thought, fuck me, I do not want to be like that. They seem like they have no empathy, no compassion. They essentially seem either sociopathic or like they have some severe repressed emotional issues, just intuitively. And so I thought, I don't want to become that. I don't want to become a robot. That's not what would happen if that happened to me. I would lose all my friends, because the people that know me from my life wouldn't know a person. I'd become a shell of myself if I was to be like these people that I was listening to, particular ones. But yeah, but overall, so I was really scared of becoming some kind of like robot, just like talks like dogma, like it's radical non-duality speak. And I thought that means that I would completely lose everything that's given me joy in life, my relationships and stuff like that. And also not just that, but just in general, like I was going to say these people don't seem happy, but what I mean by that is that, like we said in our previous conversation when it was lighter, that a lot of the time people come to non-duality or teachings of awakening or enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, either because of extreme suffering, or because they want to know the truth, or because they've had an experience and blah, blah, blah. And I guess that what I realized when I listened to the way and maybe it's really a blessing that I flitted from speaker to speaker, and I actually got to encounter the kind of lots of different people, because what I did see not so many times, but quite a lot of times, something interesting was hearing of these people who were apparently awakened, whatever. They talked a lot about their suffering now that they are apparently liberated. And they talked about different things, whether it's loneliness or a kind of, or they actually they explicitly said these things, or also I could sense from some of the ways they were talking about their lives that they seemed quite depressed. And I thought to myself, wait, if this is meant to be the end of suffering, and I'm hearing that these people are suffering more than I ever did before I got into this, then why am I looking for this? So I guess one of the strands is the end of suffering. And I didn't see evidence of the end of suffering from these non-dual speakers. So I thought, okay, this is bullshit, because these people are still suffering from what they're saying and from what I can sense of what they're saying. Obviously not all of them, but a lot. And that was really interesting to me. And thank God I still have a kind of critical thinking in place, really pick up on that. But also then on the other avenues, looking for the truth. But so many of these non-dual speakers would say that they don't know the truth and nobody knows the truth. And I just thought, what the fuck am I doing here? This thing that I'm delving into is neither the end of suffering, nor is it the truth. So what am I doing here? These people they don't seem more liberated. They don't seem happier. Because of course they would say, oh, this is not about happiness. But they would say it's about suffering. But yet I could see that they seem to suffer quite not, like I say, not all of them. I didn't see anything there that was like enviable. I just felt I don't know if it was certain people's personalities that just seemed sociopathic, but I just thought, what is the point of this? So I'm not going to get the truth of life from this. I'm not basing it on that. And they are, a lot of them seem to still be suffering. And they don't seem like the type of people I would not want to be like that. So I just thought, what the fuck? And obviously it's great that I thought, what the fuck? But at that point, I was so in the rabbit hole and I was so in limbo because I felt like I can't get out anyway. So it's all very well and good that I thought, what the fuck? But I still felt so trapped in it. But I mean, at least that was such a good opening to realize that I needed to there was something weird going on. And also another thing was that another benefit of listening to so many different types of speakers is realizing how much they contradicted each other
Yep.
and how much we didn't agree with each other about what this is. They don't agree with each other. They don't claim to have the truth. I'm sure there are loads of speakers that I didn't listen to that would say that they had the truth or something like that. But the kind of people that I was listening to would be first to admit that they don't know anything and that they have the truth of life. And anyway, I'm so sure that really helps me start to question things, basically.
Yeah. Can we go back a little bit to something that we talked a lot about over a year ago was that sort of like moments of just horror of I'm never going to be able to be in relationships again. I'm not going to be able to get married, have a family or whatever. Like what was that? Like what was that about?
Yeah, definitely. I know that when I was in progressing into this rabbit hole, I found that I found anxiety. I live in quite a small town and I know a lot of people. So even when I go to the supermarket, I'm bound to bump into someone I know, which is the best thing in a curse sometimes. But yeah, it's hard to avoid people and including friends. I really couldn't see friends at that time in the sense that or talk to anyone. Even my sister, she doesn't live in the same town, but even talking to her, I didn't know what I could possibly talk about. Not only was it that I had anxiety about what on earth I could contribute to a conversation if I saw these people, because there was nothing to talk about. I didn't feel like I could catch up on anything about what's going on in my life, because obviously I thought that wasn't true. While I thought that the whole story of what I could present of my life wasn't true, that's one thing. But two, what was I going to tell them that, what would I catch up on that in the last month or so, all I've been doing is watching fucking non-duality. That's a bit of a conversation killer. Maybe not, but then even if they wanted to know more, I wouldn't want to say more because essentially I was fucking embarrassed, really. I felt nobody understood out of my friends and stuff like that. It was just really difficult. And I know that they would have thought, basically, I thought I have nothing to contribute. I don't want them to know what the hell's going on with me. And I thought they were going to think I was mad. And by that, I also mean that I thought I was going mad. So they would have every right to believe that. And I really did worry. I just thought that people are going to start worrying about me. And there were definitely, I remember there was a moment where I thought it's really interesting because I feel like if I was to talk to my sister or close friends, they're going to worry about me. And I remember thinking at one point, but I'm worried about myself as well. And how sad was it that they basically, I can't talk to them because I worry that they're going to worry about me and maybe I'll be institutionalized or something because I might be going mad or they will think that. But it's not even like I was thinking, oh, they don't that would be silly of them to think that. I actually thought they have every right to worry about me because I'm worried about myself, how much it sucks. That if I'm worried about myself, I can't even reach out to the people I love to get the support because this is so complex. It felt like this is about the nature of existence and all that kind of stuff. And there's no one's going to understand this. Like, how am I ever going to explain it? Never mind to my friends, to a psychologist, if I did get institutionalized or get some kind of professional help. I just literally thought there's no alternative. And then aside from that, but it's interesting as well. And I'm sure that this is something that people who've gone through similar things would be quite familiar with, of not feeling like you can interact with friends. It gets you into a vicious spiral, I think, because you feel like you can't see your friends, so you don't see your friends, so you go even turn into the rabbit hole, and it just gets worse and worse. And the other side, yeah, I remember also one time I went there were little things I did that I thought could maybe help me feel a little more sane. And nature and time in nature has generally in my life been a kind of solace, or has had some kind of, when everything else fails in life, of when I feel like I can't talk to someone or there's something going on, whether I'm going through something, just going to a forest or something like that has some kind of soothing effect on me. And I really rely on that sometimes. I remember I took myself to this forest I absolutely love. And it's been like a place to go to like really just, it's just magical and lifting. And I remember walking around the forest and thinking and realizing that I was so disconnected. I was so not finding anything, any little nugget of hope or wonder or joy or magic in this forest, and just really feeling like I remember just that thought in my head just kept coming up of I've ruined my life forever. I literally just kept thinking, I have ruined my life forever. There's no going back. My life used to be good. I'm just thinking, I can't believe that my life used to be good and I've done this to myself. I cannot believe this has happened and there's no going back. I just thought, and I remember it got to the point where I think I was still in the forest and I just thought to myself, I have to find a way of being okay with this. And I thought, maybe I just have to be grateful for the fact that I actually had a good life up till now. That maybe that's something to be really grateful for. That, yeah, I've ruined my life now, but at least I had however many years of a good life. And maybe that's better than never having had that at all. I was literally going through the motions and the steps of trying to come to terms with that. It wasn't just that I was telling myself, I had the thought repeating of I've ruined my life, but I was actually believing it so much that I was trying to cope with that and narrative around coping with the fact that I've ruined my life forever for sure, it was just so fucked up. And then another time I remember when I this other walk in another place that I really love. And one of the thoughts I was thinking, the kind of narrative or whatever going through my head, the thing that I really believed again of the kind of I've ruined my life forever. I was thinking, there's no way. I used to have this dream of like maybe one day building a cabin in the woods or something and like living there and like maybe being in a relationship or something like that and maybe doing it with my partner or something. And I just thought, there is no way that I could ever have a partner. No, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's like, who would ever take me? Basically, it was like, literally, thought, I am going to need a carer.
Yeah.
I really thought, if I want to keep living in this life, if there are years left in this life for me, then I'm probably going to need a carer because I am unhinged. Like, I can't do life anymore. Like, and I thought then that like, how am I ever going to be okay again? There is no going back. Yeah. So it was awful. Yeah. I'm sure there are other examples.
It's that place that you and I have met so many people who resonate so deeply with that sense of just horror and despair of fuck, what have I done? And that sense of like finality that you were saying, it's just over for me because whether it's you were saying something like, now I know the truth, but you were saying at one point, you're like, but this truth feels more like a burden. I don't want this truth. If it's true that no one's real and I know that and all of that, then I want to give that back in some way
Absolutely.
and unknow it. But then the fact that, like you're saying, it's now you're relationally destroyed and also different levels of dysfunction because it's so maddening. But you did mention once, and we both know, like, how common we now know how common it is for people to actually kill themselves at, I think, a similar point at which you're describing. And I know that I don't think you said that you ever were actually actively suicidal, but I think you said you did get to a point where you were just, if this is what my life is going to be like from here on out, then I don't really care,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. Yes. That I didn't get to a point of being to be suicidal or even like really thinking about it so much. But I definitely got to a point where I thought, yeah, like what you said, that if this is meant to be my life from now on, then what kind of life is this to live? And it was scary. It was scary to think that because it made me feel like these are the sorts of thoughts that are going to lead to me not wanting to live anymore. I definitely got to a point of feeling like, how interesting that because I now don't like living, it doesn't bring me joy, that I'm not scared of death anymore. And if this is one thing that in a way I've heard non-dualists talk about, that you don't fear death anymore. And
Yeah.
I thought,
At least
obviously,
that.
yeah, totally. I thought this is probably not what they mean. For the first time in my life, I thought it doesn't really matter either way because this gives me no joy. That's an understatement. And it's far from true. But yeah, so I definitely felt like this is not a life worth living. And yeah, it's incredibly sad that people end their lives die. And I really get it. And it's horrible. It's so just, wow.
So now you're at the point where you started out having that initial experience, like in your early 20s, that was
Mhm.
so characterized by wonder and awe and the miracle of life and preciousness and wow. And now, having gone years later, trying to understand that, getting into teachings that spiritual awakening is about recognizing that there is no you, there is no self, the world is an illusion, we're just a character that has to be seen through, it's all this matrix or whatever, all of those derealizing ideas, what awakening is and the ultimate truth. You now end up in a place where everything's been stripped of its sense of preciousness and even if you're gonna say, like, sacredness, and that just seems to be such a common thing that happens when people have that initial experience that's so beautiful and loving and whatever you're gonna say about it, that then gets co-opted by cynical voices and messages and ideologies that are based on derealization.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm not still there a little bit, but this beautiful experience I had however many years ago on the beach, because of this rabbit hole, I actually started feeling like I wish that initial experience never happened because it felt like it was always going to lead to this rabbit hole. And so that's really sad as well to just feel like something that was just pure in my own work or whatever, or just this experience that wasn't fucked up by ideologies. It feels like it got taken away and like it's, how am I going to reclaim that kind of thing? But anyway, something that struck me as well, I randomly got really quite interested in cults after this. And it wasn't really to do with Neo-Advaita or whatever. And it was really interesting for me because I do feel like there are definitely, I don't know where to begin and what I'm even going to say about this, but just something that came to mind when you were speaking made me think about cults and yeah, and just a kind of authoritarianism and this way of fucking up your intuition. That's quite a common thing in cults and like making you not trust your intuition. And I think that's a really big part of, in a way, and critical thinking.
Not to
Yeah,
trust the
definitely.
judgment as well.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Exactly. Because anything that you question in that world of Neo-Advaita, non-duality can be basically is that's just the ego saying that. That's just the ego. That's the voice of the ego, move past that, blah, whatever. And it's so basically shuts down any critical thinking, any judgment, so it's like the perfect setup for a cult and how dangerous that is.
The more I explore all this, that's such a major part of the nature of the trap when people say like the Neo-Advaita trap. And this isn't just Neo-Advaita, of course, like you're saying, this is a pattern in or a feature of all types of authoritarianism and cults and dogma and all that. But the way that like the very questioning of the ideas that are being given to you is proof that you're ignorant and proof that you're trapped in the ego. Something else that would be maybe valuable to talk about would be how being in this rabbit hole affected your work because you're an artist and like a lot of people who go through this talk about how either like got really dysfunctional and couldn't continue their jobs, like lost their livelihoods or just felt like completely demotivated to continue with like their passions. And so how did it affect you in like your artist work and business?
Yeah, I feel like that was such a massive one for me. Where to begin, really? I remember when I first started descending into the rabbit hole, or like when it was pretty bad. I think because I work for myself, a lot of it comes down to motivating myself to create two projects of my own. So really, Maya is really involved in that. And I really felt, what on earth am I going to do? One of the things definitely is that I I look back at my work and I just thought, you didn't make that. The fact that you do what you do, which otherwise felt like really just meaningful and soulful, and I was really passionate about it, and it just felt I really loved my work. But when I was in this place, I just felt, you have people telling you that you're just a kind of almost this organism robot that's just basically it just felt, oh, this has got nothing to do with you. The fact that you make this work has got nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with who you are, like any kind of soulful stuff. Or when I say soulful, I just mean, I don't know, meaningful.
It sounds like it sucks the life out of it.
Exactly. And the passion and the love. And I just felt like how on earth am I ever going to be able to carry on doing this work when it needs me to feel involved in it and needs me to believe in it? And totally around that time, one of my children's picture books had been animated and made into a short animated film. And I was really happy with how it had been made. When it was released, I remember feeling like it was really lovely in a way. Like I had loads of people messaging me, friends or like people who knew my work and were like saying, "Oh my God, this is beautiful. Well done. Congratulations," and that kind of thing. And I just remember just feeling like completely empty and like feeling like I couldn't take, I couldn't even be happy with any of it. And I just felt in my head, I didn't do that. That's got nothing to do with me. And I just remember thinking that is later on feeling like it's so sad that at a time when something quite big happened with my work and that otherwise I would have really appreciated it and felt just and also enjoyed the love from friends and fans and my work or whatever. I remember just completely missing out on the joy of that because I just felt like I don't even exist. This is, and the fact that it was made by me apparently, it's got, who cares? That person doesn't exist and never
Yeah.
did, and and that kind of thing.
Like a major trivialization, right?
Totally. And it just took all the lights and soul and love and meaning and passion out of everything. And it was just so soul destroying, basically. And another little example, again, not to do with my work, because I remember there was some kind of like smell that reminded, like this nostalgic smell. I don't know what it was. And it reminded me of my granddad, even though I don't really remember him, but the love he put into making this cabin in Poland. And, and then I had this feeling of, God, he doesn't exist. I don't exist. He doesn't exist. And it was just horrendous, really, and harrowing to feel like none of the meaning in my life means anything because none of it exists. None of it, any of this, the beautiful story, literally, it's not real. But yeah, the art, the work stuff was really hard because I rely on myself to make work happen for me. Plus, it is quite meaningful work for me. So I just thought, what the fuck? So not only am I feeling like I'm going insane, but I'm also at some point going to run out of money because I'm not going to be able to make work. And I just remember that actually a lot of that, it was that whole messaging, non-dual messaging is very much like the inner critic and the kind of like the super ego that, because I know that equally that voice crops up even with my work in general. You can think, oh, that's a bit shit and something like that. And actually, it was the voice of non-duality hijacked the voice of the super ego, the self-critic. And it made me feel like not only did I not exist and this work has nothing to do with me, it made me feel like my work was pathetic and shit as well. And I always felt like I had the voice. And a lot of my work also previously was quite inspired by that initial experience that I had on the beach. And that was a beautiful experience before it got painted. So now I looked at my work and thought, oh, this is pathetic. I almost heard the voice of a certain non-dual speaker and feeling like, oh, like a patronizing voice being like, oh, look at her trying to express the wonder of life, but actually she's just so in the dream. It's like very much the super ego, self-critic thing.
I'm glad you said that because actually I'm remembering now. I wasn't in a rabbit hole at this point, but I was already starting to notice peculiarities. And I would have thought of it then as this is disillusionment. And so I was really into like creative writing and possibly writing like memoir type stuff and creative writing and poetry. And it was just like that voice in my head was, this is selfishness. This is you wanting to impress people. This is you wanting to have people think that you're witty and that it's just language means nothing, words mean nothing. But really, that sense that even I couldn't even really read, like, I could only read non dual books, right? Everything else was just this delusional ego self wanting to prop itself up and just really tore all of that down in such a degrading, tragic way looking back at it. But I would say I even still am a little bit affected by that. So yeah, I totally relate to it. But so now I know that as far as I know, like your passion has come back for your art.
Really.
Your work is so like whimsical and involves fantasy worlds and things that are like just so inspiring. And a lot of it seems like it's about like adventure and the preciousness of adventure and discovery. And another message in some of these non-dual teachings are that the desire for new adventures and seeking and all of that is just more of the ego.
I don't know if you can see that actually.
It's so beautiful.
I wonder whether it would be easier to
Wow. Gorgeous.
Oh,
Yeah, and we can do it with a JPEG too, if that will. So your passion came back, like your passions came back, and
mhm.
so maybe we can talk about how you climbed out of the rabbit hole. You
Yeah.
also mentioned this metaphor of the lion's mouth.
Oh, yeah. So
Oh,
one of the things, yeah, that and I'm sure a lot of people come across it. I don't know who initially said it, but there's that phrase of your head's in the tiger's mouth or the lion's mouth or something. And I heard it a few times. I really related to it because it felt, I think the whole thing is once your head's in the tiger's mouth, you can't get out of it. And I really felt, as you talked about that already, of just feeling like there's no going back now. And I remember one of the last times I heard it, or maybe not the last time I heard it, but I remember there was a point where I heard it, someone say it, and I don't know if I immediately thought, but I remember just feeling like, I wonder, the phrase that came to me is the girl that took her head out of the tiger's mouth. And it always became like a mantra and just this idea of it, is it possible that even though everyone is saying, and even though I feel like there's no going back in it, everyone is saying you you can't go back now. Is it possible that there is a way to get out of this and to be? And it was quite like there was some kind of thought that came up of like the girl that took her head out of the tiger's mouth, and to think that has actually happened is really sweet. There's something quite sweet about it, especially like the girl who took her head out of that tiger's mouth. It just sounds so, maybe because I like create children's picture books and it sounds like it's like children's book. So maybe B, it sounds quite sweet. So again, obviously,
no, we should leave that in.
she took her head out of the tiger's mouth, but she choked herself to death. But anyway, so yeah, so that is quite, almost quite touching to think back that I was so fucked up then and really just felt like there was no way out. And then it's almost like this, because there are people who feel bad about turning away from this message. And it's almost like a weakness, but actually it feels almost heroic to do it it's because not the easy thing, because it's not easy when you're in distress to keep going, but it feels like there's no other way. So I actually feel like it's fucking brave to not keep going and to really try to do, because it just feels so anti everything you're hearing, anti what you're feeling. Yeah, if there's any encouragement in that, then I hope that people can take out of that it's like, it is possible.
Yeah, I think that's a
Yeah.
positive message. And for me, something really important feels because so many people talk about how they go to their teachers and they're like, I'm like dysfunctional. This doesn't feel right for me. And they'll be like, you're just going through the dark night of the soul and you have to keep going. Like you started to cut your head off, but you have to
Oh,
keep cutting and behead yourself fully and then everything will be fine. But there's so much shaming and guilting in these communities too of the people who, if you want to turn back or go back to your egoic story, dream life, you're not enough of a spiritual warrior, or you don't really want liberation enough, or you can't handle it. And it's such a big part of that whole narrative and scene. And another thing that's a little bit cult like, but to say there is absolutely something that it takes courage and bravery also to say, I want to re embrace like the fullness of my humanity. I'm not going to sacrifice that. And what was I going to say? As you said, like there can be a sort of courage in going through the being eaten, but some people could see that as a weakness or that you're turning away from the complexities of life and the hardships of life and you're choosing escape in a sense. Okay, so then maybe we can go into some of your stepping stones to climbing
okay.
out of the hole.
Yeah. So the first stepping stone was reaching out to the therapist who was very much in the world of non-duality. And so this was really interesting for me because obviously the rhetoric around radical non-duality in any case is a lot of the rhetoric is that therapy is stupid, there is no self. So what's the point of that? But she was a therapist who was in the non-dual world and she was in a relationship with someone who was very much like a radical non-dualist. Also, I'd heard her talk quite a bit before, and I liked the way she talked. She was very different to others I'd heard, and she actually really validated the idea of the story and the importance of the story and how like we can learn from it, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I reached out to her, and actually talking to her was amazing in terms of I just really needed to hear what she said at that point, like very empowering. Like she was telling me not to give my authority over to these speakers or teachers or whatever, because actually they're very much just normal people. And I think part of the incredibleness of it was that she was so immersed in a way in that world. And yet she was a voice that wasn't like trying to convince me that I don't exist or anything like that. And that was like quite an eye opener. So yeah.
I guess one thing that stuck out for me, what you said she was helpful with, was that she wasn't like invalidating story. Like,
Right.
she may have still been, like, ultimately believing that stories are just an illusion or whatever, and that you're not the story, but that she gave value to stories. So that sense of a stepping stone. Oh, she's in the non-dual world, but she's not
Right.
shitting on stories.
Actually,
Yeah.
my next stepping stone was reaching out to, again, someone who talked about awakening and enlightenment and all that, but was also a healer. What else? Oh, yeah, she did like these kind of, she was also an actress. She was just seemed like a very vibrant person. She did like these kind of like creative, soulful, like session things. I don't know. It like, I'd reached out to her and it, like, I don't know what to call them, but I guess it was whatever. It was so helpful to talk to her
Yeah.
because again, it felt like very much reinforcing and empowering me, reinforcing the importance of Maia.
Yeah.
And so I say these are stepping stones because it was just really, I needed to hear these things, is have Maya be reinforced from people who are in the like the world of awakening and for lack of better terms, basically,
Yeah.
because I wouldn't have been able to have someone who knew nothing about non-duality or nothing about awakening.
Right.
That I wouldn't have been able to hear it from those people because I wouldn't have believed them. I would have thought that
Right.
they're like, deluded or something.
Totally.
Yeah. So these were all, yeah, very significant and helpful things for me, super helpful. And I'm just so grateful that I did them and that, because yeah, these were really
Yeah.
for me. And then also later down the line, reaching out, listening to another back that interview with you. And actually, I think I heard, yeah, it doesn't matter how I came across that, but yeah, listening to your interview and then reaching out to you. And was already way into feeling better. And when I reached out to you, but what was incredibly helpful about reaching out to you and being part of the support group was realizing for the first time that I wasn't the only one, that I wasn't some kind of glitch, that this is quite common, very common that this happened. And up to that point, I just kept thinking that I must have made some kind of mistake, something had gone wrong. And I just didn't know how to reconcile that.
So I know, like you described, and a lot of people describe, I definitely felt like I went through a period of like rebirth and like rediscovery of the precious reality of self and relationships and a world that's real, but like feeling like it becomes real in like a new way that's like even more wondrous and awe-inspiring. And there's like this outpouring in a way of like love and like excitement to be a person and to be fully human again, like a new appreciation for that. So do you want to say a little bit about your rebirth experience?
Yeah, do you know what's really interesting? It's like hearing you say that, it's really bringing back the memory of that. I still have that kind of, I remind myself, oh my God, I'm alive. And I went through that. I got through that and I get to have this life, my relationships and stuff like that. So it's every now and then when I remind myself, I can like, or like when I'm going through something difficult, I think, I'd rather this than what I was going through before. But actually, oh, yeah, just remembering, re embracing, really looking at the world and being like, oh my God, I get to have this life. I get to be Maya and have these relationships where sometimes there's difficulties in them, sometimes there isn't, but it doesn't really matter because it's just so rich and incredible and wondrous. And wow, it's so fucking cool to be alive and to be human and to, yeah, just coming out of that and yeah, having this rebirth experience. I think I remember saying this to you at one point because I remember when I was in the rabbit hole feeling like there is no way I could ever look back at this and think positively of it. I remember feeling when I was experiencing this kind of rebirth into being a human and actually not thinking that it's false to think that you're a human. I remember just feeling like, wow, like I don't think I would have experienced this otherwise. And it's so gorgeous to have that. We take it for granted, don't we? That just being alive, and that's how it is. But this is amazing, like, to be a human and Maya, and wow, this is so fucking cool. And that
Yeah.
was just so beautiful, so beautiful. Yeah, highly recommend.
Highly recommended. Go through the rabbit hole just for the highlight out
Totally,
of it.
totally
Silver
worth.
lining for sure. I have a question I just thought of, because you've said a few times that like you don't feel like you necessarily had benefited from the teachings or shifts in the way that some people experience, like this radical falling away of my sense of self and that radically liberating or joyful or blissful result of that. I'm curious if it was helpful for you also, because I think we talked about this before, where you had mentioned that it was meaningful for you to hear from people like me and some other people who felt like they really had the full sort of shift into that nobodiness and disappearing and all of that, but experienced the some wonderful effects of that, but then ultimately realized and decided that no, this is not the be all end all, and there's no self, no suffering is an illusion, because you can also suffer from nihilism and losing your relationships and meaninglessness and disassociation and all of these things. That was that also helpful for you in a way to know that
That,
like, you can have that and also experience the liberation from it, but not choose that and turn to another path of re-embracing.
that was incredibly helpful. Thank you for, yeah, reminding me that,
Just
because
thought
that
of
was
it now.
definitely, and it's good that you remember that, because I think that was massive, because I think otherwise I would have always questioned whether it was like I'd never experienced that
You
thing this
just
time
not
around.
have the right experience or whatever.
Totally. And like that also reminds me of another thing, kind of a segue from that, is that I think that over time, there's going to be more and more people who are currently speaking about it in that world who are going to actually realize that it's not that helpful for them. And they're going to move in the direction that, that you've moved
Yeah.
in, that we both
And
moved in.
even people like that you followed in the beginning, like Jeff Foster, for example, ended up being
Absolutely.
like, this was dehumanizing. And
Absolutely. Countless people actually, and that was actually really helpful to see that the people who were so convinced of it and actually spoke about it, had like meetups about it, have actually then gone away from it. But I also feel that there's going to be a lot of people who hold on to, there's going to be this kind of, what is it, like the sunk cost fallacy or whatever, of they've already invested in becoming teachers and stuff like that. And it's really hard to then admit that either you were wrong or to wonder what to do next. Because I can imagine that could be really difficult.
yeah,
And I mean that in a way of, I can imagine if I was in that position, I'd find it really hard to know what do I do now. But I'm not saying that everyone's going to have that, but I just seeing by how many people who used to speak about it
yeah,
and actually like want other people to know about it are now like realizing the negative effects of it.
yeah,
I think that's going to be that is probably a very common experience. A lot of people are going to go down the route that you've gone down. A lot of people are probably going to struggle more with doing that, because maybe they've made careers around talking about this. That was such a help for me, realizing that all these people that were convinced of it
yeah.
had these experiences or lived in that, I know you're not meant to say state or whatever, but whatever, and then and really promoted it or talked about it, to see that that was so helpful to then see that they'd moved away from it.
It's so common, and I'm sure you heard that messaging too, that's if you were harmed by it or you questioned it or you decided to pull your head out of the lion's mouth, that you didn't have the right experience. And if you did, then you would have realized that it's like the ultimate in well-being and all of that. But from my perspective, and I think yours now too, from talking to other people, that this is also an illusion and not the actual reality.
Totally, totally.
And you
Yeah.
were also saying a little bit about like understanding and having empathy for those who are drawn to these paths because of understanding how the major relief that it can bring. But then also you were talking a little bit about like dissociation and
Mm.
disembodiment, and in terms of you're nothing, you're nobody, there's absolutely nothing here, and you're not a body, you're just not, you're not anything.
And that can be that can really be a relief for some people who are really going through it. I can so imagine that, like to be told that, yeah. And I don't know if trauma response is the right term I'm thinking of, but children, for example, dissociation in general can be such a, is it trauma response? I can't remember the actual phrase for
Yeah.
it, but if you're going through some kind of abusive situation, for example, to dissociate is incredibly helpful. It's like a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, I'm not calling awakening experiences just pure dissociation. I'm not saying it's just that, but there is from the kind of way it's talked about in certain circles, it does seem very dissociative. And I can really see how that does provide a lot of relief, and understandably, because that is in other terms, it is like a trauma response and it
Yeah.
does help.
So when you look back now at your initial wonderful experience before you went down the rabbit hole, how do you relate to it now?
I wonder whether there is going to be a time where I'm going to want to address it or think about it again and wonder, what was that? What does it mean? What does it point to? Yeah, so it is a little bit still a bit of a question
Yeah.
mark. Yeah.
But in maybe in a hopeful way, that's like this time you won't be looking to the nihilistic radical non-dual teachings to interpret
Hopefully,
it. I don't know if you have any messages for people who might be in the rabbit hole or who feel like there's no way out or no way to revive their soul or their life force. If you,
Yeah. I guess in summary of what we've said, it's that I really relate to that because I was there and I genuinely thought that I had ruined my life forever. I was so deep in believing that there was no going back. I literally felt like that whole, I can't remember which is which, the blue pill and the red pill in the Matrix, and just wishing I'd never seen the truth because I thought that was the truth. Wish I'd never known the truth. I wish I could just be ignorant. Ignorance is bliss. Obviously, I don't feel like that anymore in the sense
yeah,
of I don't believe that that was the truth that I saw and that one's true and one's not. And here I am now, really not feeling that at all, and like so grateful to this incredible life thing that's happening. That's just it's so fucking cool to experience life as a person.
yeah,
No, whatever you prefer, really. But it's either way, it's fucking cool and it's so mysterious either way and miraculous. And that actually, in a way, I know it sounds really cheesy, but there is hope. So it's incredible to yeah, just sometimes remind myself that I was there. Obviously, I don't think about that on a day-to-day basis, but every now and then when I remember that I was in that place, it
yeah,
is amazing to be
yeah,
out of it and just be so literally I remember like because we were talking about earlier about the whole thing of that rebirth thing. I remember just feeling like, it was so amazing being in that place of being like so astonished by the joy of being having this experience of being okay as being a human again. I remember thinking like, yeah, it's almost a blessing that when I was in the depths of this harrowing experience, I felt like if only I could just go back to like how it was before. And I remember coming out of it, I was like, it's amazing that not only have I gone back to that, but I
yeah.
have this extra beautiful aspect of the appreciation of it, like this extra appreciation of it. I really fucking love being me.
Yes. And it's also, I don't know, I feel like part of what I love is that I feel like these kinds of trajectories can also show that it's not really going backwards, but you're going forwards to something beautiful and like a new way
Totally.
and positive transformation. But I just see like for someone like you, because I think so many people become so tragic because like they started out as a super vibrant and colorful and rich personality and passions and creativity and all this stuff. And becoming, let's say, like an empty shell of a person and feeling like they can never revive like their individual, let's say, soul or just individuality, that it seems like you've certainly revived that or resurrected that or whatever you want to say. And you have such like a quirky sense of humor and such like a rich, colorful personality that's I feel like touches many people who you know. So it also brings people together, and I'm so glad we met. I love you a lot.
Likewise. Oh my God. Literally, as you were saying that, I just felt like it reminded me how much it helps meeting you. Because you're like, and realizing that you had such a quirky, weird sense of humor as well,
Thank
and all
you.
that. And just, yeah, and just knowing that you'd been through what you'd been through, and that this is possible to be still, yeah, to come out and survive it, and also just not just survive, but thrive. Yeah, it has really reminded me of like how the support group was so helpful in even though I had already done a lot of the kind of getting out of the worst of it, just realizing that I wasn't just fucked. It wasn't me who was fucked up, and that's why it led to that. It's that these teachings can really fuck people up.
Also, everyone who shares their story, like you and other people who are doing that now, are contributing to so much good as well. Because the more that people can feel like they're not alone in it and understand it more from other people that have been through it, I think more and more people are going to be able to come out of it sooner, hopefully avoid the rabbit hole, choose different paths even. I also just have so much appreciation for you being willing to share your story so openly, and you didn't shy away from the darkest parts either. So
Thank you.
I don't think I realized how many, let's say, neo-Advaitists or radical non-dualists had, for example, been saying themselves that they were addictively listening to Tony Parsons and trying to get it, and then they got it, and now they're recreating that experience for all these other people. That it's possible that similar to your experience, they had some kind of experience, then were looking for a way to understand it, and that got co-opted by one spiritual paradigm that they then took on when they might have had an option to hear a different paradigm that was humanistic and not derealizing anything, and what a different trajectory that could lead to.
Totally. And like, just thinking that, say, for example, like these people who now speak about non-duality, and prior to that, they had been seekers and they'd been listening to someone like Tony Parsons. And then to think that Tony Parsons, before he was speaking about it, he was a spiritual seeker, though he tries to deny that and like to gloss over
Right.
that. But like, he was a spiritual seeker for quite some time and was those different gurus or speakers. And those gurus, in turn, they had their spiritual seeking phase. They had been listening to their gurus, and those gurus, and it's all, it's just passed down the line. This one framework, one spiritual framework that has got, whether it's to do with a no self trajectory or whatever. And just a question like, yeah, it all comes from somewhere. It's just this whole regurgitating this framework.
It's like applied as the ultimate reality.
Pretty, yeah,
Sargent and Ramanam Harshi had their gurus or had their own system and
exactly.
books they were reading that they followed and had the experience that they were set up to have. And
Exactly. And that's the thing, the emphasis on set up to have. And like, I know that you've talked a lot about that, like with the Greek and stuff like that, about how the kind of non-dual rhetoric can set you up to have these experiences. And then all you have to fall back on is the rhetoric of non-duality to explain them.